The thing is, you have bandits, you have other criminals, you have corrupt police, you have competition, criminal groups in competition with the one I'm working with. So what I will ask my criminal group of choice is to protect my land and business against other threats. So I will now also pay the criminal group to protect my land, protect my workers. And then I will probably ask the criminal group, because it's the way it works in many regions of Mexico, to protect my trucks and protect my goods when they move from my land to the processing areas and warehouses that take the produce and export it to the US, for example.
How can I help? How can I be useful in ending needless suffering? Do not be afraid of work that has no end.
We have to organize a social movement.
We have an opportunity to lead by example versus just talking, hot air.
I think the more people in this fight, the more we grow. Eventually it could change. The people are the ones that can make the change.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Change Agents, an Ironclad original, presented by our friends at Firecracker Farm. Today's episode is with senior expert for the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime, Romain Le Cour. And it's about how cartels are extorting the avocado industry in Mexico. Green gold is what they call it. Romain's work often dives into topics such as organized crime, militias, and territorial dynamics, with a particular focus on Mexico. And his research has explored subjects like the role of self-defense groups and cartels in reshaping territorial power in Mexico, and the political and social consequences of illicit economies in Central America. Let's get into it. How did you make the jump from focusing on agriculture in Mexico to Haiti? I mean, not exactly the same genre.
No, actually, my background in Mexico was really on criminal organizations governance.
Yeah.
So basically, the way drug cartels and many other groups, control territory, populations, resources, markets, roads, and especially markets, illicit and licit ones. And I used to work mainly a long time ago, and then I did a PhD on that in the west of Mexico, and this is where criminal organizations have been extremely good at actually investing and permeating licit markets in a very mafia style way. To be honest, extortion, protection rackets, all that. So it took me to work on many licit markets that go sometimes even way beyond and in many more complex ways than drugs, for example, or just, illicit markets that work in a very dodgy way, in a gray way, but that work between like a set of actors that just move around, illicit economies and all that. It's sometimes quite enlightening to actually see what's happening in illicit markets and avocados, of course, and agriculture in general. It's avocados, it's lots of high added value products, basically, that are bound for export, especially for the US, Japan, and the EU. So it's avocados, lime, blueberries, strawberries, timber, fish, raw fish, shells. So it's a mix of all that. So basically, I used to work on criminal organizations governance, and this took me from Mexico to Haiti.
Yeah, I've had quite a few conversations over the past few years focusing on a variety of cartels, interrelationships between the cartels, maybe what the different cartels are focusing on, how they came to power, how they interact. But what you mentioned is a theme that seems to be coming more and more to the forefront. A lot of people want to talk about just issues directly at north of the border in the U.S. So a lot of people want to focus on just the immigration or human trafficking or sexual trafficking and the narcotics trade that's associated with that. But the more people that I talk to that are looking at the cartel, they say a lot of the same things. Like, yes, that below, we'll call it, the below table or below the board, Those operations are, of course, going to exist because they're incredibly lucrative, but they're seeing more and more above board operations, whether they run in the mafia style, with a hammer and fist. But it's this diversification and investment into licit businesses, which are creating these entities and organizations that are so deeply tied not only to the country and the economy itself, but the politicians. It is, I know people want to be able to just, pull on one thread and unwrap this package and have this beautiful explanation, but it is anything but that. It's so wildly complex.
Yeah, I wish we could have one explanation. I mean, I wouldn't have a job, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's been super interesting. I mean, the evolution has been, I mean, it's tough, it's sad, and it's a bit depressing, honestly. But it's super interesting to see how criminal organizations have been acting as, service providers for many actors on many tasks, and I think Avocados make for a great case to study that as well. They've been working as protectors for many actors and markets, licit and illicit. They've been working as investors for many markets, licit and illicit, and they've been able to, again, like work in many different ways that are not necessarily mutually exclusive. So you can actually run a very dangerous and lucrative drugs business, transiting cocaine from South America to the US or anywhere else, getting chemicals to produce fentanyl and re-exporting to the US, etc., which is like I would say the core part of the business, if you wish.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also a core part of the business that is today much more complex to control and penetrate than before. Like 20, 30 years ago, you and I we could probably run a fairly good drugs business between Mexico and the US without having tons of international connections, tons of protection, tons of money, tons of skills, tons of contacts, the networks, etc. Today, honestly, the big players in Mexico running, drug trafficking to a massive level of operations are not so diverse, or at least it's a much more like pyramid scheme of operations, on top of which you have big groups that then work with many subcontractors and other people that help the drug trade work, but you still need like a huge operation to, get the chemicals from Asia, get them to Mexico. You need to pay tons of people, corrupt a lot of people. You need to control a chain of supply. Then you need to produce the drugs. Then you need to export to the US. You probably need to bribe people in Mexico and in the US. So all that is quite complex. Running an extortion scheme, it takes like, honestly, 3-4 guys and a couple of streets. I've been working in Michoacán, in Guerrero, in Tijuana as well, and in Baja California. And you have extortion schemes that are set on 3-4 streets in a village or in a town, even in a massive town like Tijuana, for example, that has, I think, over 2 million inhabitants today.
Mm-hmm.
It's a scheme in which you can implement, it's not easy to do, but implement protection rackets, basically saying you can work in your pharmacy, you can work in your small restaurant, but if you want to work well and you don't want anything bad to happen to you, you have to give me 10% of what you make. And with a couple of people, you can probably run a couple of streets and make very good amounts of money just at extorting people. And yes, making sure that those people pay you because you're able to, use violence against them if necessary. And Avocados is this taken to an extreme level of market in terms of value, because it's a multi-billion dollars industry, a legal one. It grows exponentially. It grows and grows and grows because the demand grows. And again, it's a legal market. So you need better connections, stronger connections. You need to make sure that, everything is up and running. But no one wants, for obvious reason, no one wants to shut down the market. So for a fact that the market will keep on growing as long as demand will keep on growing, because the market is fundamental for Mexico's economy. It's GDP points we're talking about. And it's fundamental for the US demand, in that sense, the US consumption of avocado. So basically, if you're tapping money out of a legal economy that works extremely well, you know that you're making, and you will keep on making, tons of money, which is, again, like running an extortion scheme. It is complicated and dangerous, but you probably take a bit less of a risk than, transiting and transporting drugs from, like South America to New York. So it's been a way of doing this. But at the same time, what has happened, as you said, is a sense of some groups, not all, had very good skills at controlling territory, controlling roads, controlling armed men, controlling acquisition of weapons and ammunition to make sure that you have your men pretty much well trained, but also well armed. The ability of controlling corruption networks as well, controlling people that give you access to certain markets and certain schemes within the authorities, within the police, within the private sector, and then putting all that at the service of, again, if you want the business to run smoothly, we can do it, but it has to go through me and it has to go through us. If not, you guys know exactly what we're capable of, because you know us and you know how threatening we can become. But for the good sake of our relationship and the good sake of business and legal business, in that case, everything should run in the smoothest way possible. So it's a kind of tragic evolution of, some people call it violent capitalism. I think it's not a bad expression.
I've never heard that described like that, but that hits the nail on the head. Violent capitalism. I like that. I do want to dig into the avocados, but because it's fascinating to me. I had never thought about a cartel connection. I'm curious though, before we get into that, I don't know if you know this, we just had a presidential election here in the United States, very contentious. And the incoming administration has been very overt. We're going to go to war with the cartels. We're going to smash the cartels. Do you even think that's possible at this point, given how intrinsically tied they are inside of almost every level of government in Mexico and in these industries?
On paper, everything is possible. Yeah. I mean, it's starting a war and all the options. If you want to put all the options on the table, I think technically everything is possible. I think it wouldn't be necessarily very realistic, first and foremost, because of the relationship between the US and Mexico. If you take away all the rhetoric, the speeches, the promises, the way the issues between the US and Mexico have been used in multiple elections in the US and in Mexico as well. Mm-hmm. If you take like day-to-day relationship between the US and Mexico, the two countries are inseparable. Mexico today, I think it's still the first trade partner of the US before China. You have the border. And if you combine trade and border plus the population that works on both sides, and it's absolutely inextricable.
Yeah.
Like honestly, the US probably cannot really run very well without Mexico, and Mexico cannot run well without the US. So I guess it's like going to war with your second leg or something. It's really, again, like using the rhetoric of the war is very, very hard to confront with the reality of the relationship. That even when the US presidents go after Mexico, complain about Mexico, and then the Mexican presidents do the same about the US presidents and all that stuff, like it's part of politics, and I get that. But on day-to-day, business goes basically because everybody needs that business, multiple business fronts, and we're talking jobs, millions. It's billions of dollars or trillions of dollars. It's the border, that the border was open for work and business even during COVID. You had like the only exemptions that you had almost in the world in terms of borders were a couple of crossing points and a couple of exemptions between the US and Mexico, because you need that border to actually work. And the border actually works. Beyond rhetorics and beyond all that, again, you have millions of people that cross the border every day from Mexico to the US and vice versa to work, see family, travel, etc. Like it's a massive issue. So if you go after the cartels and you go all at war against them, I think first and foremost, it's again, like everything is doable and plannable, but it's really hard to fully confront the cartels on the ground today, except if you want to go into probably a level of operations and war that could probably compare to, most of the Middle East or Afghan operations over the past 20 years. I mean, you would need to go, region after region, deep into the regions, deep into urban and rural areas. And even if you manage to do so, as you said, then there is, let's say, the corruption angle of things that you wouldn't be solving anyways. And the other thing is, people, even in Mexico, honestly, people talk a lot about, the war on drugs, the war on drug cartels, what we can do, what we cannot do. And when people say we need to go to war against the cartels, like we have been doing this for the past 60 years.
Yeah.
In Mexico, in Colombia, and so many other places. Which is interesting is that in a way, if you're a public authority, if you're an elected official, we could imagine that any public policy should be, accountable for. You have to assess the success of the failure of a public policy. The war on drugs is interesting because it creates a market and a public policy market in which we spend many countries, dozens of countries, billions of dollars a year for a policy that apparently is not really working. Like if the primary objective is to stop drug trafficking and drugs consumption, it's a disaster, right?
Yeah, objectively.
So we should be able to reassess in a way. So if today we say let's go to war against the drug cartels, it's basically war on drugs 2.0, 3.0, I don't know. But it's basically what we have been doing for the past 30, 40, 50 years. So it's not, I think it's not really realistic, and it's not really novel at the same time, unfortunately.
Jumping to avocados. How did this hit your radar and the connection to the cartels? I mean, I enjoy a nice avocado. I also recognize where I live in Montana, I should only be getting them maybe 1 month out of the year, but 12 months out of the year, they're here for me. So I'm aware that they are traveling from somewhere. Until looking at the show notes, I had never thought about their connection with the cartels, though.
I guess the first connection between avocados and criminal organizations and the drug cartels in Mexico is land and geography. Until last year, for the past 30 years, avocados from Mexico could only be exported to the US from one region in Mexico, one Mexican state called Michoacan. Michoacan is situated on the western part of Mexico, and since the 90s, it was the only Mexican state that had the certification to export avocado to the US. Then it's a market that has been growing exponentially for the past 30 years. Since 1994 and the signing of NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, avocado production increased 213%. But even more important, the value of the fruit, the value of any avocado produced, consumed, bought in the US increased by 7,000%.
Green gold.
It is the green gold.
Yeah.
The thing is that green gold grows in Michoacan, especially. Michoacan is the #1 producer in the world. And Michoacan is also a land of many opportunities, but it's also a land of criminal organizations. It's also an historic region for drug trade between South America and the US, between Asia and the US, the connection of precursor chemicals since the 80s and 90s to produce methamphetamine, for example. cocaine routes coming from the Pacific Ocean through Michoacan to the US. So what you've had is basically the growth and the development of a massive, extremely lucrative, fantastic legal economy, avocados, parallel to the growth and the development of very sophisticated and powerful criminal organizations in the same regions. And what happened is basically the connection between the very powerful criminal organizations and the very profitable fruit and export market that happened in the same land.
Ladies and gentlemen, do you need a gift idea for somebody that you love, or do you just want to treat yourself? Well, I have one for you. Firecracker Farm hot salt is an absolutely awesome gift. It is delicious, it's handcrafted, it's beautifully packaged, and it's unlike anything else that is out there. Everybody who tries it absolutely loves it. Firecracker Farm has different flavors and heat levels like Pineapple Express and hotter stuff if that's what you're into, and their limited run buddy batches, the Apocalypto and Snake Eater. There's something for everybody. It's made with love, and a percentage of every sales goes to OP300 and the Pipe Hitter Foundation. There is one drawback, and that is you might not be able to get them. Firecracker Farm is a very small family business, and Alex can only make so much at a time. So there is a chance that they're going to run out. And once you get your hands on one of these grinders, you're going to understand exactly why they can't make them in batches. This is a handcrafted grinder with an amazing salt inside of it. If cost is your main concern, worry not. There are hundreds of thousands of servings per package, which is way cheaper than any sauce. And it's not going to over flavor like a lot of sauces traditionally do. If you are ready to upgrade your culinary game and get your hands on one of these amazing grinders yourself, use the code Ironclad, all one word, all capital, to get 15% off your first order at firecracker.farm. How deep does it run when you're talking about avocado trade, and we can extrapolate it out from there? How deep does that corruption run within inside of those Mexican authorities?
It is quite deep, and I would probably take you through the process of how the market was consolidated in a way to show you how relationship work between corrupt authorities, corrupt private sector actors, and criminal actors in general. Of course, I'm not saying like all authorities are corrupt, all private sector is corrupt. Like not the entire economy works and runs on a criminal market. But what happened a lot is that very profitable economy exploded in Michoacan, right? So the pressure on the market, the pressure on the land was extremely strong to expand production of avocado because demand was so high from the US, from the EU, and from Japan, basically, at some point. When this happens, basically, you have the expansion of land. The thing is, especially in Michoacan, a huge part of that land was protected area, natural forest, natural parks, land on which you were not able to deforest, not able to open any production of any fruit or anything, basically. What happened back then is basically many actors wanted to expand the agricultural frontier, to expand the market. And then what you need to do if you want to expand it is to get into some corruption schemes, basically, because you need to go into protected land. So to go into protected land, what happens is you have multiple options. You can go to a corrupt official and ask that corrupt official how to make sure that a small piece of that protected land becomes a productive land, and that productive land belongs to you. So you have to buy that piece of land and turn it illegally into a land that produces avocados. The other option is to ask a criminal group, an armed actor. This is also sometimes the case when you ask even the Mexican police, for example, to make sure that the land that was protected is open for deforestation. And what you start doing is deforesting illicitly, of course, illegally, a land that used to be protected land. So you go to a criminal organization, for example, and you tell the criminal organization, look, I will pay you that amount of money if you deforest, if you conquer the land, you deforest, if you find people living, working, or anything, do whatever you want with them. But I need that land clean. So then I can go to my corrupt authority with a new bribe and tell that corrupt authority, I need a land certificate, and I need a property title to make sure that the land is now mine and that I can use it. So the way it's been working is a mix between this relationship of criminal organizations being service providers to many actors that wanted to expand the agricultural frontier in Michoacán, and expand the agricultural frontier on protected land. Again, remember that Michoacán is #1 producer in the world, right? 70%, 80, that's official sources. 80% of the avocado orchards in Michoacán were established illegally, initially through unauthorized land use that was then turned into legal parcels thanks to the corruption of public authorities. So what you have is a region and a market that grew exponentially at the hands and with the collaboration, to a certain extent, of armed groups. And when you start doing this, you keep on using armed groups or criminal groups for multiple services. Let's say now I have my orchard and it's producing. The thing is, you have bandits, you have other criminals, you have corrupt police, you have competition, criminal groups in competition with the one I'm working with. So what I will ask my criminal group of choice is to protect my land and business against other threats. So I will now also pay the criminal group to protect my land, protect my workers. And then I will probably ask the criminal group, because it's the way it works in many regions of Mexico, to protect my trucks and protect my goods when they move from my land to the processing areas and warehouses that take the produce and export it to the US, for example. So basically, I keep on requiring the service of the criminal organizations to expand my business, protect my business, and protect my product. The thing is, in a very, I would say, classic mafia type evolution, the person you have in front of you is still a criminal actor first. He has power and the ability to use violence against you, your workers, your farms, your trees, your avocados, your trucks, your employees. And at some point he will tell you, look, you're paying me 10% of this to protect your land, but I know how much money you're making actually. So I want a bigger part of it. I want a bigger share of it. So you will give me, and that's literally what happened in Michoacán 10, 15, 20 years ago. The criminal group said, you're paying me 10% of this, but now I want 10% of each hectare that you work and that you produce avocado, each tree, each fruit, each employee, each truck, each box, each contract, each expansion. I need 10% of everything you do. And if you don't, you know exactly what's going to happen. So out of that kind of balanced, let's say, theoretically balanced relationship you had at the beginning with the criminal organizations protecting you, very quickly the relationship goes into something very different, and you have to renegotiate, and many people die within those renegotiation processes because the criminal organizations then say, I don't need you anymore. I need to make an example out of a couple of people. I need to use violence to make sure that your neighbor will pay when I will ask. And also because the criminal organizations and the leaders were smart enough to understand at some point that they should invest also in the market from day one and not only get their money out of extortion. So what they did was to put money into land and avocado and invest in the market, or take the land from you, make you disappear, kill you, and basically take your property, take your business, take the market, and just take the operations you were running. And that's how, again, like the collusion work. And that's how, unfortunately, the avocado market has been, developing in a very violent way, but in an interesting, paradoxical, very efficient way. Like the market has been growing exponentially as violence was also growing exponentially.
Yeah.
And this is how it's been structured over the past 30 years.
Is the increase in, I'll call it the tax that the cartels are trying to extort from these growers, is that impacting the cost of avocados worldwide as well?
Yes, it's usually, it's very hard to assess, of course, because it's very hard to calculate the importance and the value of extortion value within a product, because it's very hard to assess at D-Day. Let's say avocados is like, I don't know, $3 a kilo today, or 10. Let's assume that 10% of that value goes to extortion. Maybe it's a bit more, maybe it's a bit less. But basically, we can assume that one part of avocado value at the end of the year ended up in criminal money. And it's also fair to assume, like in any other market, that extortion is taken to a certain extent as an externality, something you have to take into your business model, basically, because you will have to pay for it. And in Mexico, and especially in Michoacan, a huge part of the economy is under the pressure of criminal groups. So basically, it's very fair to assess that one part of the value of the product goes back to criminal organizations. But because it's a market and a value and a price that fluctuates a lot, it's sometimes hard to assess. What's easier to assess sometimes, just to give you a kind of a comparison, is when you go to a small shop in areas in Mexico and you want to buy Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola costs more or less the same anywhere because the market is more or less fixed. You know more or less how much you pay for a liter of Coca-Cola. In certain places, you go and you pay for Coca-Cola and it's much more expensive than 3 villages away. And if you manage to talk to the shop owner that is selling you the bottle of Coke, he or she will tell you, well, I'm sorry, I have to, someone is asking me, 10% of what I'm making out of the bottle of Coke. So you will have to, the consumer will have to pay for it. So we have to assume that to a certain extent, extortion and protection racket is usually repercuted to the final consumer, because the person and the persons selling it to you, and in the case of avocados, you have so many brokers and intermediary within the chain of export that everyone will tell you, I'm not losing 10%. The next one is going to pay for it. So you raise the money basically, because no one wants to lose those 10%.
Yeah. That's wild cascading downstream effects to the violent capitalism, a price control or increase all the way back to the point of origin. Attention warriors, are you ready to push your limits and become a stronger, more resilient version of yourself? We've teamed up with MTNTOUGH Fitness Labs to deliver a fitness program designed for those who live by the creed of excellence. Whether you're active duty or a veteran or a hunter or just someone who's ready to tackle the challenges life throws at you, the MTNTOUGH app is your battlefield for building mental toughness, physical strength, and it isn't just a workout program. It's a mission to forge you into a high-performing athlete, prepared for whatever comes next. We are so confident in this program that we're offering a full year on the app for just $120. Use the code CYBER50, that's all capital letters, all one word, at www.mountaintough.com. That breaks down to just 33 cents a day. Think about it this way. Investing in your fitness is one of the few things in your life that you can control. If you want to be the best, it starts right there. Dig in your truck seat, find the spare change, and commit to your mission of strength and resilience today. There is a redemption link down in the show notes, and the sale starts on the 22nd of November. And the promo code can only be used 1,000 times. First come, first serve. See you there. Is there any world in which U.S. suppliers in distribution networks do not realize the influence of the cartels on this product that they're bringing across the border? Or are they just kind of turning a blind eye and pretending they're oblivious to it?
It's hard to say. I mean, it's been well documented, to be honest. It's been well documented in media, in multiple media in the US and Mexico, many other countries. You have documentaries about it. You have movies about it. You have radio shows about it. I guess we know. The thing is, like it happens in many other places in the world and many other products, the business is really good, and the market keeps on booming. I think the only thing that could lower the pressure on avocados in general is demand for some reason collapsing. Like no one in Europe and the US willing to eat avocado ever again.
So
But
yeah,
this is-
a news report comes out, 2 avocados a week causes deadly cancer, something like that. That's about it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess I get that. That's kind of about it. The other way around is, can we find a way not only to, I would say, like make people more conscious of what's behind avocados and either the violence, but also the environmental costs and etc. Like avocados is a story on which you can build like multiple angles, because it draws like multiple challenges of today's markets, I guess. But it's also making sure that in a way we could be asking for maybe more regulations on the way avocados are produced. So it would be, and it's hard to do because of political will, to be honest. But you could imagine like a kind of agreement or I would say label. It's kind of a mafia-free label on certain products in Italy, for example. Certain products in Italy used to be extremely extorted by the mafia, and some groups and some industries and people within the market said, all right, we need to make sure that we can guarantee to the consumer the fact that the product you're buying is mafia-free. Could we try to implement this in the case of Mexico? I guess theoretically we could, in practical terms and in real life. It could be done. I don't see I don't see the political will to do so. What's happening actually is usually the US putting lots of pressure on Mexico when violence gets to a point in which the market is directly threatened, or if people working directly for the US government, in that case, the FDA, are threatened on Mexican soil. Because what happens with avocado, and it's again like an interesting paradox, is that it's a very violent market, but it's an extremely well regulated market and product. You have commerce regulations, business regulations, and health regulations. And health and sanitary regulations are probably the hardest. So what you have, because it goes to the US, you have FDA inspectors in Mexico making sure that the product is okay for consumption in the US. So those people are usually deployed on Mexican soil. They work for the FDA. They can be Mexican or US. And they make sure that the avocado is fit for consumption. What happened over the past years is that you have extreme pressure on those inspectors because they hold the final say at telling you, the producer, if your avocado is fit or not to export to the US. Which usually the producers, that's why they're also extremely well organized in terms of, again, like health and hygiene regulations. If you go to a avocado farm in Mexico, it's extremely clean. It's extremely well organized because you need this to export to the US. But sometimes you've had incidents. A couple of inspectors have been kidnapped over the years. They disappear for a couple hours, then they appear beaten up or not. But basically, what happens usually is that the US at that point, and it happened twice over the past 3-4 years, the US suspends in a minute the import of avocado from Mexico. They just close the market. And the reason they use is saying there's been a threat on phytosanitary inspectors from the FDA or working for the FDA. We can't tolerate that, so we close the market. And it usually takes 3, 4, 5, 6 days of negotiations between the Mexican government and the US government to reopen the market. I think 4 or 5 years ago, it happened 2 days before the Super Bowl final.
Oh boy.
The Super Bowl, which is, the number one day
for guacamole.
avocado consumption.
Yeah.
So basically what happens that the US suspended import like 3-4 days before the Super Bowl. It took, I think, 48, 72 hours of very intense negotiations between the two governments to say, okay, you know what, like, let's find a solution. We can't suspend the export right now. We need to find a solution. It happened again 4 years after that. And now the agreement, which is interesting and at the same time doesn't solve the problem, but it exports the problem, or at least the management of the problem. Now the US have delegated the inspection to Mexican authorities. So basically, now you can probably bribe, threaten, kidnap an inspector, but it won't affect the relationship with the US. So you won't have to suspend imports whenever that happens. And it will probably take the pressure on the inspectors into an even grayer area of corruption negotiations, bargains, and all that. So right now, to be honest, nothing is really being done to regulate the market, except for phytosanitary inspections, basically.
Are you saying similarities in this type of cartel involvement in industries, both inside of agriculture and outside? Because, obviously Mexico is producing much more than just avocados. If you look at just where it is on the globe, right? I mean, there's some avocado growing in California, microscopic in scale, just because the climate is different. But I've heard things about mining industries, even lime, so other agriculture. Are you seeing a similar involvement with these cartels?
Absolutely. I mean, it's massive, it's growing, and it's absolutely systematic in Mexico today. I mean, it's very hard to find an industry in general, a market in general, that is not affected by extortion and protection racket on so many levels. It goes to very classic stuff. And that happens also in many other places, including European countries, the US, but, construction, for example. Construction is a very classic market and industry that is usually very affected by protection, bribes, corruption, extortion, etc., because you have to negotiate a lot of things, and a lot of things may be done in cash, for example. So it's ripe for extortion. Construction and tourism in Mexico is extremely deeply affected by extortion and pressure by criminal organizations. And it's also true in very dynamic areas of the country, including Quintana Roo, Yucatan, Cancun, Tulum. You've had multiple cases of assassinations, of shootings, confrontations, scandals, corruption scandals, bribe scandals that involve public authorities and criminal organizations saying, you want to open an hotel, a multi-million-dollar a year hotel in Tulum, that's absolutely fantastic. But if you want to get, again, the land title, you will have to go through me. If you want to open a bar within the hotel, it's great, but you will have to go through me. If you want to sell drugs within the hotel, it's fantastic, but you will have to go through me, etc., etc. But you can take it to mining, absolutely. I mean, mining is a quite dirty business anywhere in the world, and it's always convenient to have people that protect the mine. For example, it's a mix between private security companies, public forces, police, and then any actor that is willing and able to actually protect trucks and mining operations in many places in the world. It's quite dirty. Again, like mining, agriculture, tourism, industries, trucks, like transportation of goods in Mexico, they have been under a very high amount of pressure. You've had like good media coverage on that as well, like truck drivers saying, we get threatened like multiple times a week, and we have to pay. But you have to pay if you're, like Coca-Cola, transporting Coca-Cola, you have to pay as well. It's not the thing with corruption and extortion, and protection racket, again, like very mafia type operations, is that it goes from the small shopkeeper in your small village to a top 5 world company. Because basically it's the same mechanism. At some point, you will have to run a warehouse, a road, the transportation of good, you will have to move something, and as soon as you move, you will need my protection, basically.
Yeah.
And this is the way it's been working in Mexico.
Is there, just trying to think about this from the perspective, there's the geopolitical perspective where politicians I totally agree with you. It's on Mexican politicians talk about what they're going to do with the US politicians talk about what they're going to do with Mexico, whether or not things change at the actual border itself day to day. Hard to even imagine that they shift more than a fraction of a percentage point. And for almost everybody who doesn't work in a geopolitical environment, they go to the grocery store, they live their life. Is there anything that can be done at the level of the consumer that would make an impact here? An educated choice? I mean, I'm just trying to think of specifically avocados. If I go to the grocery store, there's no marking on what you talked about in Italy, whether it was corruption free from the mafia or not. There's avocados there or there's not avocados there, or a variety of other fruits, whether it's grapes or things, pineapples, right, that you can't get in Montana. How can the consumer make an educated choice in this? Or is there even an opportunity to do so other than being non-attached to this environment and literally just saying, I'm not going to consume these things, which is a shitty choice?
No, absolutely. I think theoretically, there should be multiple options. The first one, it's hard to do, but it's, especially in the US, it's not unseen at all. It's thousands or more of consumers that actually start a sort of mobilization, movement, class action, something to put pressure on the industry and say something needs to change. And if it doesn't change, we don't buy the product anymore, or we sue you for multiple reasons and angles within the industry. Is it you as an importer not making sure that in a way the product you're importing is coming from a drug cartel controlled area? On paper, in theory, it could be achievable. It's extremely hard, I guess, and it would take forever, but it could be achievable. So there is, from the consumer point of view, the ability collectively, and again, it probably requires a massive movement, because you're talking about like millions or more than that of consumers per year, making sure that the industry is under some sort of pressure. And the same sort of pressure, of course, applies for the government at saying you've been able to suspend imports when you're worried about, for very good reasons, the safety of FDA inspectors in Mexico. That's very good. So you're protecting U.S. interests in that case. Why we don't work on regulating again the fact that we need to be able to import mafia-free or cartel-free avocados from Mexico? Is there a way to do it? Probably, if there is a massive and competitive business incentive. The thing is, today again, the market is too good to go, too big to fail in a way. Like the market is working, the market is expanding, the business is growing in the US, in Europe, elsewhere. People want avocados. So if the business is booming, unfortunately, the business will work very well with very, very high levels of violence. And it's been the case in Mexico. So basically, in that sense, the consumer is a bit left with an individual choice, to be honest. Is you can bet on the fact that the avocado you're buying is okay, and it's a good product, and it hasn't been produced in a drug cartel control area, or part of the price you're paying has not gone to drug cartel money. But other than an individual choice today, there's not much that is actually being done. You have some initiatives on both sides of the border, but again, it's hard to get in front of a $1 billion industry.
Yeah.
It's not impossible. You can think of, again, like, I don't know, it's very different, but like trials against cigarette manufacturers. I guess at the beginning, people would have said like it's impossible to sue a cigarette manufacturer in the US. Like on which ground do you think you're going to win against them? But the industry is more regulated than before. So I guess the opportunity is there, but it's really tough. And then you need something to happen in Mexico. I mean, in Mexico, there needs to be an effort to combat extortion, protection racket, corruption of public authorities at multiple levels, to make sure that the market is a bit and the industry is a bit cleaner, honestly. And it hasn't been done because, again, the market is booming. Those are GDP points for Mexico annually. And regulating this takes a lot of courage and lots of political will, and it's a combat that people don't really want to take on if you compare it to the figures. Like if the market was crashing tomorrow morning, like crashing literally, people would probably say, okay, let's rebuild the market in a cleaner way, maybe. But right now it's too good, too big to fail, to be honest.
What's going on, everyone? This episode is also brought to you by Allegiance Gold. Recently, we've witnessed a surge in gold prices, reaching an all-time high of shy of $2,500, an impressive 20% increase in less than a year. In a market where traditional investments are increasingly scrutinized, gold and precious metals have emerged as compelling alternatives. You may ask, why should I invest in gold? Well, I'll give you a few reasons. Gold has long been valued for its stability and ability to preserve wealth across generations. It's a low-risk investment that provides security and balances out more volatile assets, especially during economic downturns. With the US dollar weakening due to rising national debt and inflation, gold acts as a reliable hedge, increasing in value when the cost of living spikes. Furthermore, it remains a crisis commodity that retains worth in times of geopolitical turmoil, as investors often turn to gold when global tensions rise. Finally, gold is a private, tangible asset, offering discretion and liquidity in a digital age prone to data breaches. If you are interested in learning more, go to protectwithandy.com today. Listeners of the show will get an exclusive lowest pricing on the market for select gold bars. That is protectwithandy.com. That'll be in the show notes. Or you can call 844-790-9191 to talk to an account representative. Do you have any estimate or hypothesis on, when it comes to the cartels, the percentage of their, call it their income, that they make from licit versus illicit? Not that everything, I mean, what they're doing in the corruption and what they're doing in these licit markets, or it's not that it's legal, but from above board to below board, if you were to put a percentage point to it, what percentage of it is coming from licit markets versus illicit markets?
It's a great question. I think going back to what we were saying at the beginning, if we're talking about big drug cartels in Mexico, like the biggest criminal organizations, it's almost impossible to assess what they're making out of illicit markets, unfortunately, because we don't know like the volume of drugs being transported all the year and all that. But from what we see in certain places, certain environments, certain industries, and certain illicit markets, it's probably fair to say that, I don't know, 2/3 of their income comes from drugs and illicit goods, fully illicit goods. And the rest might come from, like 1/3 might come from licit markets on which you have a mix of money laundering and extortion and protection rackets. But if you go to much more, I would say much smaller criminal organizations, or even, bands, gangs, local gangs, etc. Some of them make probably, 90 or 100% of their money out of extortion, or a mix. between moving drugs or selling drugs, for example, and also extorting and putting this kind of racketeering in place, because it's based on the smooth operation of the legal economy,
Yeah.
which is in the interest of everybody. Again, like it's in the interest of everybody that the industry works well. Tourism in Tulum and all that. It's in the interest of everybody that the industry keeps on growing, that more people come to Mexico, visit Mexico, spend money on tourism. There is investment, public and private, etc. In a way, what's interesting with extortion and protection racket is that when it works well, it's invisible. It's like an insurance. You don't see it, but it's there, basically. And the thing in Mexico, unfortunately, in a cynic way, but unfortunately, you have too many players fighting to become the insurer. If you had one very well organized mafia group able to say, I will provide you with a level of protection that you don't have to worry about anything anymore. If you pay, it's going to run smoothly. It would be less violent. The thing is, what's happening in Mexico is you have multiple actors fighting among each other, using violence against each other, but also against you and I, against police, public authorities in general, to make sure that they become this insurer. And this is, again, like you have the market, avocados, for example, but to become the protector of avocado market, I have to fight against you. Because we all know that this is like gold, and I want to control protection on that market. But to control illicit protection, I need to use violence and become the sole operator. And it goes on and on and on and on and on, basically. Yep. That's why the response must be and must come from the justice system. You have to investigate and prosecute people that are involved in corrupt activities. And as long as we don't have that in Mexico, and it's really not the case, as long as we don't have that, what's the incentive for criminal organizations and corrupt officials altogether to stop doing that? It doesn't occur. So basically what happens is, going back to your initial question about, the kind of market shares between illicit goods and illicit markets within criminal organizations, it's hard to assess, but what we can definitely assess is that if you compare what happens now and 30 years ago, the share of extortion and protection racket is exponentially bigger than 20, 30 years ago. And it's a huge part of criminal activities in Mexico today, just dedicated to extortion and racketeering.
I want to leave the listeners and viewers at least with I don't think there's a solution on the consumer end of this, because they're at the extreme downstream end of this. Like, there's national geopolitical things that are going to have to occur, I think, to solve this type of issue. But as far as somebody, and I put myself into this category, I go to a grocery store and I get what I want, and I put very little, if any, thought into what it takes to actually get there, except for when it's in the dead of winter here in Montana and I can get a fresh banana. Usually I see those, I'm like, this is a little bit weird because I just came through 3 feet of snow. What would you suggest for the consumer that is at the tail end of this, that probably doesn't want to participate in an ecosystem that involves corruption or violence or extortion? Is it education? Is it awareness of what it is you are participating in? Where would you start people on their journey that if they wanted to make an educated choice, at least they would be able to do that? And maybe it's going to be a choice between bad and a little bit less bad, but it's a choice nonetheless.
I guess it's a mix of all the options, unfortunately. But first, it's trying to assess and know where the fruit is coming from. And it doesn't mean that all fruits coming from Michoacan are all dirty, for example. I mean, you have decent people, honest people producing avocados in Michoacan. You have a huge part and a large part of them actually producing clean fruit. The issue, again, is how do you separate what's clean from dirty? And I think this is where the consumers, again, can put pressure on the system to a certain extent, and ask for, I don't know, the legislators, local and federal probably, to put a bit more pressure to track and trace how the fruit has been produced, what's the conditions behind it, and what can we do about regulating this. Then in terms of local consumption, it's also a case of seeing where the fruits are coming from, and seeing if we can buy, avocados from somewhere else that is a bit less affected by violence, at least. I mean, the environmental impact of avocado is another discussion, but at least in terms of violence, try to see where it's coming from, and again, it goes into an issue of traceability of the product. If the origin of the product is really non-stated, I guess the first claim would be to ask anyone up the chain to say, like, we need to know where the product is coming from, because as a consumer, we have the right to know where what we eat comes from, basically. So I think there is that kind of pressure, and then again, an issue of making sure that in a way we can go step by step into saying we need the market to be slightly cleaner, because it exists for other goods. Even it doesn't really work all the time, but even diamonds have been regulated. You're not supposed to be buying blood diamonds. Can we do something about avocados? I guess we can. I mean, it's an issue of political will. So again, what consumers can do is probably put pressure on politics, on policymakers, on your elected officials, and telling them we want to change the rules of the game to the extent we can, but it has to happen in the US and in Mexico at the same time, because otherwise you would be regulating one part of the story and not tackling the other one. So it is a massive challenge, honestly.
Hope you enjoyed today's episode, and I hope it gets you thinking the next time you go to the grocery store. Put a little thought into where the things that we absently consume and source here in North America. If you want to check out more of Romain's work, you can follow him on Twitter at Romain Le Cour, and the link will be down in the show notes. Thanks again for listening to Change Agents, an Ironclad original presented by Firecracker Farm. I'll see you all next week with an all-new guest and an all-new episode.
We don't just do the filmmaking. We do everything. We've taken a case study of over 30 projects that we've done over the past 15 years, and we put together what we believe is the most effective and efficient content funnel for brands. They need content on a daily basis. They need to be talking to authentic end users. We want your team to bring its most challenging problems and allow us and our team to apply our proven methods to your brand to take it to another level.